It's Wednesday in Tryon, North Carolina. Higher Ground is the name of our place, and we're on Melrose Mountain. And today I want to continue the series on faith from the book of James. It's reported that one time a Sunday school teacher asked his children's class, "What is the sin of omission?" Paul raised his hand feverishly, and the teacher called on Paul and thought he was going to give him a great answer. Paul said, "The sin of omission is the sins we should have committed, but we didn't." Then Johnny started raising his hand saying, "No, no, 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 no." Teacher called on Johnny thinking he was going to straighten everything out. Johnny says, "No, the sin of omission is the sins that were not as much fun as the sins of commission." Well, we all know that neither one of those answers is correct. But when we look at the book of James, it certainly helps us to understand. You almost have to go back to the entire book in order to understand. In verse 17, it starts out with therefore. Anytime you find therefore in the scriptures, it's coming to a conclusion based on what was said before the therefore. And today, when we look at verse 17 to answer the question about the sin of omission, it starts out with therefore. So let me go to the therefore. In chapter 4, verse 11, it says, "Do not speak against any others and judge others." We all have a tendency to be able to judge those that are doing things that we don't do. We're not too quick to judge others that are doing the things that we are doing. James clearly says we're not to be the judge. In verse 12, he goes on and says, "Only one has the right to be the lawgiver and the judge, one who is able to save and one that is able to destroy." Well, I'm sure you know by now that that's God. And so we need to remember that there's only one person that really has the right to judge, and that's the lawgiver, the one that made the laws that we're supposed to follow. As a matter of fact, one year we took an evangelism class, and one of the things that was taught there is about that judging, and it says when you point your finger, and you can see that I'm doing that here, at somebody else, you have three fingers that are pointing back at you. So when I judge you on maybe one thing that's not right in your life, in fact, I'm pointing three fingers back at myself, because chances are there's lots there to be criticized. So the only one that's really equipped to judge is the Lord himself. Now, does that mean that we can't judge the fruit of somebody's life? Well, no, of course it doesn't mean that. We shouldn't speak against them, but we can look at somebody's life and say, you know, that life is filled with sin, that life is filled with selfishness, that life is filled with whatever, and realize that's not what we want for our lives, and that's not the way we want to live. But to speak against them or to judge them because that's not an area where you struggle is wrong. So James goes on and says, then not only are we not to judge, but he says, consider this. Consider the brevity of life. Now, I know that a lot of my audience that watch my videos are my age, some even older. And one of the things that I'm sure that those of you that are above 30 years of age realize is that life is just as it says in verse 14. It says, your life is like a vapor. It's here just for a little while and then it's gone. This week in evangelism conferences down at the church, the speaker said, have you ever watched the steam come off a cup of coffee? You see it coming up off the cup of coffee, but it's gone fast. And that's exactly the way our lives are. God warns us about that in the book of James in chapter 4 and verse 14. And he says, no one knows what their life will be like tomorrow. We don't have a guarantee for tomorrow. We don't have a guarantee for next hour. So many times I have heard people say of a loved one or of a friend, I talked to him yesterday. We were laughing and joking. Today they're gone. And that's the way life is sometimes. So James is telling us don't judge others. Only one is capable of judging. And don't be pointing the fingers and talking about somebody else, because life is short. It's like a vapor. And don't go around, according to verse 15 and 16, planning and boasting about what you've done or what you're going to do. It's real easy to do that, isn't it? And there's nothing wrong with accomplishments and pride in accomplishments, but we need to be careful it's not boasting. We need to be careful we're not planning beyond what God has in mind for us, because maybe we're not going to have the number of years or days, months to do what we said we're going to do. So here we come to the sin of omission. Verse 17, therefore, because of these things, because we shouldn't be judging, because life is like a vapor, because there's only one that can judge, and he's the one that can save and destroy. Therefore, to the one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. What does that mean? Well, when we know that we ought to go help a neighbor, when we know that we ought to make a hospital visit, when we know we ought to apologize to somebody, when we know that there's something that we ought to do, and we know it's the right thing to do, and we don't do it, that's a sin of omission. You know, the sins of omission are not seen readily like the sins of commission. If I'm a drunkard, it's very obvious. If I'm a drug addict, it becomes very obvious. If I'm an adulterer, it becomes very obvious. If I steal, it's obvious. But the sins of omission, the things that we know are right to do and we don't do, are not obvious to others around us, but they're obvious to God. And it's very clear here in verse 17. The one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it's sin. That's your thought for the day. Don't let it be an omission. God bless you.